Back here on Busted Open, Dave LaGreca, Mark Henry. You hear the music. And probably over the last 4 months, people might have forgotten, but this is actually Brock Lesnar's entrance theme. I know you haven't heard much of it over the last 4 months, but for those who have forgotten, that is Brock Lesnar's WWE entrance theme.
Wow, it's been a while since I heard it.
It's been a while, right?
I think it was like maybe WrestleMania. No. It was the
Greatest Royal
Rumble.
Yeah, that's the last
I heard
one. Yeah, you heard it. You were there.
Yeah, I was there. I stayed out of the way. Pick up a big sumo wrestler.
You did.
On my back.
Good job with that, by the way.
Well, thank you, man. You know, I still got it.
You still got it. You still got it. I think we might have heard some of those chants at the Greatest Royal Rumble, but you mentioned the Greatest Royal Rumble. That's the last time that we've seen Brock Lesnar, your Universal Champion, defend that title. That was back in April. We go through May, go through June, and now here we are in July. We're a week away from Extreme Rules. That championship title is not going to be defended. And Kurt Angle sent out a tweet a couple weeks ago that Brock isn't defending the Universal title at SummerSlam. So think about that for a second as we go over 4 months without that title being defended, and you haven't seen Brock. But guess what? If you're watching UFC 226, you got to see Brock Lesnar, because not only was he out in the crowd, but after Daniel Cormier, I think I'm saying his name right, Cormier, is that it? Okay, all right, just want to make sure. I don't want to get the UFC fans angry at me. After he wins the title on Saturday night, Brock is now in the Octagon, shoving the champion, and now it seems like they're building up towards a championship match, which is crazy at the fact that this guy just won the title, A. B, Brock is not signed with the UFC. By the way, the last time Brock was in a match with the UFC, I mean, it didn't exactly go smoothly as far as things that may have been illegal going into that fight. So he's not even sanctioned to actually fight right now. And then Daniel Cormier wants him to challenge him. Like, what the hell is going on here? Our Universal Champion doesn't defend the title. It's going to be well over 4 months before we even probably see him again. Who knows when's the next time we're going to see Brock Lesnar on WWE television. But he has no problem showing up at a UFC pay-per-view and challenging for a championship match that, A, he doesn't deserve, and he's not even signed with the UFC. So, Mark, tell me, try to explain to me what the hell is going on right now with Brock Lesnar.
Man, listen, I'm not great at math, and this is not... This is not in my wheelhouse. I can't even put it in the words, like how ludicrous this is.
It's crazy.
I mean, from the standpoint of Brock going into a UFC ring, he got invited, and they said, "Well, Brock, come in and say a few words," and most of it was him dropping F-bombs.
Yeah, classy.
So much, and. The second thing, he pushes a licensed fighter on television in front of everybody, and in my experience, if you pushed a licensed fighter, like you usually go to jail. You touch them, like, I mean, if they hit you back, you rather go to jail than have them hit you back. But, I mean, I don't understand how they didn't take him out of there in cuffs.
Nope.
He's got a suspension, a drug suspension that he has to, live out.
Yeah, so
if they do sign him, there's going to be 5 or 6 months where he's not going to be allowed to do any UFC activity.
At best, it would be January of 2019.
Right. So, I mean, it's like, why? Why now? Why now? I don't understand. It's like, this is one of the most frustrating things that even if you have all the information, which we have all the information right in front of us, you're puzzled and baffled by the whole timing of it and why and how. it's like we have all information, but we know nothing.
And listen, Mark, and there's a lot of layers to this conversation. We're going to try to dissect this with the help of the Busted Open Nation, 844-796-7874. But I don't get into this whole war. There seems to be this war between UFC fans and their legitimacy of their sport that they follow, and they have passion, and I respect the passion that the fans have for MMA and UFC. You know, pro wrestling fans, I don't think seem to have a problem with MMA or UFC, but there is definitely
not at all.
There's definitely a divide but not from our end, but it seems from the
other side.
From the other side,
the UFC fans don't want to feel like their precious sport is pro wrestling.
Yeah,
and you know what? I think business is business. When you trying to sell tickets, you want to sell tickets with people that people want to see, and people want to see Brock fight. But I'm on the other side of the equation. I want to see him wrestle. And if he wants to fight, then let him fight. That's what he wants to do. But take the title off of him and give it to somebody that's going to defend it.
Yeah, but there's and we're going to get to this because there seems to be an end game, even when it comes to WWE and Vince McMahon. But really quick, because, and listen, MMA programming is big on our channel. So I respect it because it is part of the channel that we're on. But, you know, hello, MMA fans, your sport is pro wrestling. Let's face it. I mean, what we saw this past weekend, you can't tell me that wasn't staged. From what you're just saying, if it was a boxing fight and a guy who wasn't a signed boxer walked into a ring and pushed a licensed boxer, he'd be going to jail. The police would be handcuffing the man and taking him to jail.
And I'm not talking about Steve Austin going to jail. No. I'm talking about jail.
Yeah. Brock Lesnar, who is not right now a sanctioned UFC fighter, stepped into an octagon and shoved him. Physical contact. That just would not happen. And then, again, what gives the right for Brock Lesnar to have a championship title? First of all, he's not signed. He doesn't deserve a title shot, but yet they're building up a title shot he doesn't deserve. And 3, come on. What if Daniel Cormier lost that fight on Saturday? This all seems a bit staged to me. This is all about pro wrestling. So the UFC fan could say, I hate pro wrestling. This is a legitimate sport. There's credibility here. Come on. Let's get off the legitimacy and the credibility, please. Because all MMA was talking about before this past Saturday was CM Punk, a pro wrestler who, by the way, went by CM Punk. He wasn't Phil Brooks that stepped into an octagon. It was CM Punk, and he stepped to the octagon while playing Cult of Personality, which was the song he played when he was with the WWE, for crying out loud. And now, after all this, while fans during Saturday's pay-per-view were chanting boring, then all of a sudden you see Brock Lesnar enter the octagon, a pro wrestler who, by the way, is a champion in the WWE. Now all of a sudden everybody is going, yay? Come on, if you're a legitimate MMA fan, you should be pissed off right now. You should be angered at the fact that everyone's talking about the UFC to talk about CM Punk, and now everyone's talking about the UFC because of Brock Lesnar. 2 pro wrestlers. So, to me, nobody would be talking about the UFC if it wasn't for pro wrestling.
And on top of that,
that's a fact.
That's a fact, Jack. And on top of that, Ronda Rousey getting inducted into the UFC Hall of Fame. Like, the top 3 stories in their sport is all about wrestlers.
And she couldn't wait to get out of that Hall of Fame ceremony because she had to be at a house show.
Not just any house show.
Well,
not just any house show.
True, a pretty big house show.
Madison Square Garden.
And she made her debut this weekend. But do you hear what I'm saying, Mark?
I hear you.
Brock Lesnar is your universal champion.
Screaming from the mountain.
CM Punk had 0 experience in an octagon. He was a pro wrestler his whole life, but yet he's on a UFC pay-per-view. And then you have Brock Lesnar and Ronda Rousey and CM Punk. These are the names that are being mentioned when you talk about the UFC. Daniel Cormier just won a title. He owes 2 titles. He's your light heavyweight champion and he's your heavyweight champion. But is anybody talking about Daniel Cormier? No, they're talking about Brock Lesnar. That's a fact right now.
That's unbelievable. And you brought up, that's a great point. Daniel Cormier is one of the best fighters that ever fought. And there's not been one time where I've heard him being mentioned, whether it be on the ESPN, on Fox, or any of the sports outlets, where they talk about him as much as they talk about Brock.
Yeah. And listen, Daniel Cormier, and we talked about this before the show today, he's a WWE fan. He's a pro wrestling fan.
Yeah. And anytime we're in California, we're in San Jose, like, he's there with his kid. And I love it. I love to see people come out and enjoy our business. And hospitable, just a really cool dude. Like, I mean, Daniel's never had a reputation of being like a hothead or a butthole or anything like that. He's one of the class human beings in that sport, and he deserves to not be pushed, and he deserves to have his name up in lights the way it should be. He is the universal champion of MMA. He's brought together both categories. How often has that been done? If it's ever been done.
I mean, and respect to him. But to me, Mark, there's a fine line between what's good for business and credibility. Now, with pro wrestling, you blur those lines because it's pro wrestling. That's what makes pro wrestling an attraction. That's why I love pro wrestling. But we know in the world of boxing, the world of NBA, the world of the NFL, there's a line between what's best for business and credibility and legitimacy. A good example of that is Brock Lesnar. Brock Lesnar tried out for the Minnesota Vikings. He didn't make the team. He got cut. Why? Because he wasn't good enough to play. Now, if the Minnesota Vikings and the NFL wanted to do what was best for business, they would have signed Brock Lesnar to a contract to play for the Minnesota Vikings. The year that he tried out for the Vikings, the #1 selling jersey for the Vikings was Brock Lesnar. So what was best for business? Brock Lesnar. But it's a credible, legitimate sport. So they had to say, you know what? We can't have him play because he's just not good enough. The UFC let CM Punk in the Octagon, and this is no disrespect to CM Punk. I'm not disrespecting CM Punk, but I think he showed that he didn't deserve to be in an Octagon for the UFC, and especially on a pay-per-view. And now all the attention is on Brock Lesnar, and you're going to tell me that the UFC is not heavily, and let me repeat this, heavily influenced by pro wrestling? Then guess what? You got your head up your ass, because that's exactly what's going on here.
Tell the truth then, Dave. Tell it.
Well, there's a lot of truth, and there's some comments by Daniel Cormier that I'm going to read.
I come rough, tough like an elephant tusk, your head rush, fly like Egyptian musk.
Throw up the woo, Dave. You gotta throw up the woo.
Is my woo too wide?
No, you gotta hook the thumbs.
All right, I gotta hook the thumbs.
Yeah, gotta hook the thumbs. Yeah, that's it. That's that woo right there.
Yeah, look at me woo, ma. Look at me woo. I gotta be careful with my woo.
Oh my God.
Sometimes my woo's wide. Sometimes it's too tight. Nothing worse than a tight woo.
Don't
or
do that.
Better than a tight
Don't do that woo in California, because that's look like a gang sign.
Oh no.
Yeah, we don't want you to get caught up in that drive-by.
You don't have to worry about me doing my woo outside of the studio. Gotta be careful.
You gotta be
careful nowadays.
You gotta be careful where you woo.
Now. Yeah, there's a lot of places I can't woo anymore. Married man. There's only certain areas I'm allowed to woo.
Not that woo.
Oh no?
No, we were talking about the sign. They're throwing up the woo sign.
I got a one-track mind, Mark.
Yeah.
I'm always thinking about the woo.
No comment, too.
Oh my God! People are. There's a little. We gotta take a little break from the Brock talk. Just we gotta ease the tension a little bit.
Yeah, we got people calling in, assassinating our character.
Well, I'm sure there's going to be a lot of people that agree with, our take on Brock.
Yeah, but it'll be mostly wrestling fans.
Yeah, well, I mean, those are the people that listen to our show. But the UFC fan, why did that look Greca doesn't know what he's talking about? The UFC's credible and legit. He deserves that shot.
That sounds like denial to me.
That's definitely denial. It's the UFC is pro wrestling. Dana White and Vince McMahon had a sit-down handshake deal. Come on. There's a reason why now you understand that he's not defending this Universal title. At the end of the day, Vince McMahon is saying, you know what? I'm going to have a Universal champion that's also going to be a champion for the UFC. But at some point, he's got to defend this title. Do you remember, and it's not that long ago, if you didn't defend the title within 30 days, you got stripped of the title?
You got stripped of it. And that's exactly the truth. And I think that's well, obviously is not the case now, but that was the case for years and years.
Well, I mean, and I'm not even going back to like Jack Tunney in 1986 with the WWF. I'm talking about recently with Daniel Bryan with the Intercontinental Championship. Naomi, she got stripped of her title because she wasn't able to defend it in 30 days. Now what? Brock is able to defend it, once every 6 months? Twice a year, maybe? We're getting on that shaky ground. And listen, this is not like he's your U.S. champion or Intercontinental champion. He's your Universal champion. In the eyes of the WWE, this is the biggest title. It's not to me. It's the title that AJ Styles is holding right now. But in the eyes of the WWE, that Universal Championship is the biggest title for them.
Not only is it the biggest title, but it's the one that gets the most notoriety because you are that guy. You're the face. And I mean, it's ridiculous, man, to see all this time go by and him not defend that. I mean, that's why there's so much programming for other things, is because you're trying to fill that void.
Yeah, and you have a show that's over 3 hours long. Let me ask you something. When it comes to Daniel Cormier, is there any chance that he, if he was ever to fire, if ever to go up against Brock, that he would lose and that Brock would win, or vice versa? Could Brock go into this fight and lose? And what does that mean for the Universal Championship? What does that mean for the WWE? Or do we know already, if this fight's going to take place, that Brock Lesnar is going to win?
Well, it's both brands. If Brock Lesnar loses, well, it assassinates what's going on with the WWE. And if UFC loses, then it takes away all the power from their world champion and hands that over to Brock Lesnar. So, man, I'm just shook. This is it's good radio, it's good talk, but in the real world of sports, like it's taken away one way or the other.
Yeah, and you know what? As a fan of pro wrestling, and I'm not necessarily a fan of the UFC, do I really care? I just want to see that championship defended. I just want to see Brock wrestle. Like, what's the problem here? Like, to me, the whole world of the UFC, it really isn't a big factor to me at all.
I was so excited when Brock Lesnar and Braun Strowman went at it. Oh, man, it was so good. And all the fans were the same thing. That was the big buzz at the Royal Rumble. Mm-hmm. And now they haven't touched since the Royal Rumble. Like, man, you would have thought, oh, that'd be a best of 3 series, something.
Yeah.
What we get? Nothing.
Ungats. Here, yeah, I mean, and that's the thing too with Braun Strowman. He has that Money in the Bank briefcase. What good is it if Brock is never on the show? How are you supposed to cash in that briefcase? Holding that means absolutely nothing right now, because he can't cash it in because your Universal Champion is never on TV. Here's the thing. I don't care about the UFC. It doesn't mean anything to me. And honestly, right now, I don't know if the UFC is really mainstream like the WWE is. WWE is the one that's going to Fox in 2019. That's going to be on primetime TV on the main station on Fox. To me, the WWE is more mainstream than the UFC is. So to me, I don't care about the UFC. The UFC doesn't mean anything to me. So if this is all a ploy for Brock to hold those 2 titles, I don't care. It doesn't matter to me. It does more for the UFC than it does the WWE. Do pro wrestling fans, I don't think, care about the UFC. And we know damn well, Mark, that UFC fans don't care about pro wrestling.
I would beg to differ. There's a small amount. I would say under 20%, but the majority, they look down on wrestling for some reason, and I don't understand that, because their business is becoming pro wrestling.
Yeah. Well, to me, right now, I look down on the UFC. After what I saw this past weekend, I have to admit, I look down on the UFC.